Well, this talk is called The Value of Community, okay? And here we are together again on a Sunday morning. This time, now you know I like to do this, right? This time we are on the 14th day of the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, which commemorates the revelation of the first verses of the Quran to Muhammad, praise be upon him. It's also, as Mark mentioned, the 14th of Adar, which is the Jewish festival of Purim, which celebrates the liberation of the Jewish people from their Persian oppressors, who were led by a high government official named Haman. Can we get a s? Boo. You got the spirit, okay? How'd I do, Mark? Tuvia, Ruth. Yeah, we could. Next year. Also, today is the Christian day of Palm Sunday that commemorates, excuse me, Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem after 3 years of itinerant wandering and traveling and teaching around the countryside, gathering ever larger crowds. He entered the holy city of Jerusalem humbly on a mule, and crowds of people welcomed him because they loved his message of love and resistance to oppression, and they waved palm leaves, which is why it's called Palm Sunday. From the perspective of the natural world, in the wee hours of March 20th, last Wednesday, we had the beginning of spring equinox. Spring, which is spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, when the days finally start becoming longer than the nights, and the soil and waters begin to warm, and we're all a great deal happier than we have been in a while. Finally, it is, and this might be a little known factoid, it's the beginning of Climate Justice Month, which began on World Water Day, March 22nd, this past Friday, and extends right through to Earth Day, which is April 22nd. And this year, Earth Day focuses on calling for a 60% reduction in plastics production by 2040. Can I get an amen? Amen. Right, okay. So, I got so excited that my clothing is coming apart here. Well, so these are all observances that we can mark and that coincide in this moment of time, but none of them constitute the reason why we are here today, why we gather as Unitarian Universalists and as friends of Unitarian Universalists this Sunday, or in fact any Sunday, literally remembering, recomposing this community of reason, reverence, irreverence, and care. Many UUs say that they come together on Sundays and on other days for community. But what does that mean? I mean, it means to play and eat and converse and discuss and work together. But what does coming for community really mean? Well, here's some thoughts. Some gather for inspiration, to hear innovative ideas, sometimes from whoever's standing here and most of the time from each other, and to hear new ways to approach living within this troublesome human condition. We come for stories, the stories that surprise us and therefore educate us, stories that inspire hope even when the world at large seems quite bleak, stories that make us think new thoughts that we haven't thought before, and in the words of the children's chalice lighting, in fact, to celebrate the Church of the Open Mind. Reverend A. Powell Davies, a Unitarian minister in the first half of the 20th century, offered this, however: I come to church and would, whether I was a preacher or not, because I fall below my own standards. Likewise. I fall below my own standards and I need to be constantly brought back to them. It's not enough that I should think about the world and its problems at the level of a newspaper report or a magazine discussion. it could too soon become too low a level. I must have my conscience sharpened until it goads me into the most thorough and responsible thinking of which I'm capable. I must feel again the love that I owe my fellow human beings. I must not only hear about it, but feel it. And in church, I do. So he says. So some gather to be spurred to feel, not just to think or believe, and in fact, to marry thinking with feeling. In fact, again, in the words of the children's chalice lighting, marry the church of the open mind with the church of the loving heart. So some gather to have their consciences sharpened, considering what love asks of us as part of the human condition, what love calls us to do in this troubled, hurting world. And again, in the words of the children's chalice lighting, to be part of the church of the helping hands. So I'm probably a little sensitive to that one because I was a very sickly child and I spent a lot of my early years in the hospital due to operations on my ear, and only by the grace of advanced medical science and the art of medical science were mastoid operations sufficiently sophisticated by that time that I even survived. And I even wondered when I was small, why me? Why was I one of the lucky ones? You know, what might the gift of life ask of me? The answer to that question can only be found within our own hearts, okay? Our hearts have a stamina that our minds don't. So sometimes we gather to understand how we are required to act from that place in the heart, from the place in which what we know we can do meets the need of the world. Some gather to be regularly reminded of the practice of gratitude. The practice of gratitude can begin with every single breath, breathing in this air that has been exhaled by sequoias and grasses and oaks and seaweed, and air that has been breathed and recycled by ants and gorillas and ducks and owls. Many of us gather, particularly when our hearts and spirits are aching with loss and betrayal, grief, confusion, or despair. We come to hear words of comfort and reassurance, and perhaps even to remember that we can be seen and loved as our whole selves without having to put on that mask of fake perfection, you know, the mask that says everything is just fine, while inside our hearts are breaking and our lives are falling apart. We come to know for one brief moment in the week that we are loved just as we are, by people and in this place, by people who are as flawed and as imperfect as we are, and with whom it is safe to be vulnerable. Some of us, having traveled some path that's taken us in surprising directions, come explicitly to have our growing edges both nourished and challenged by the living waters of the unexpected that we find here. And of course, many come to celebrate the joy of simply being alive in this always wondrous, if often difficult world. Now, some people consider Unitarian Universalism a do-it-yourself faith community, which is constantly providing questions for our answers rather than answers for our questions, which is a little bit too challenging perhaps when life is hard. Our values, however, are grounded in the belief that only we ourselves can come to know how it is with our soul in this life, and that if we open ourselves to the world in all humility, knowing that all of us are equally worthy, and occupy positions within this complicated web of life that are equivalent, we can discover the touchstones of our own individual lives, even when they differ wildly from one person to another. And there's a comfort in knowing that most of us are continually on some kind of journey of self-discovery or spiritual discovery. That is actually why most of us are here. We often observe, in fact, that Unitarian Universalism is grounded in values rather than beliefs. So let's take a moment to look at that word values, because after all, the title is The Value of Community. And probably most of you have noticed the ambiguity of that phrase, right? So Webster's New Thesaurus gives many synonyms of the noun value: advantage, desirability, importance, merit, significance, all of this, or the verb. When we value something, this can mean that we appreciate it or cherish it or esteem it or prize it or treasure it or hold it dear. And this is in fact all of what I've been talking about before. When we use the word in this sense, it calls to mind the 7 principles, 7 Unitarian Universalist principles that are found in the hymn book, the blue hymn book. This hymn book here, right after page VIII. And if you, yeah, it doesn't have a page number. But if you look right near the front, there's a page that says, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote," and then it lists 7 principles. There are a lot of them, and they're all worth reflecting on. And so I invite you, perhaps later today, I'm going to have a discussion session after this presentation service, and maybe we can discuss that further there. But I want to also point out that we have a new image, which looks like this, which describes a lot of the same ideas that are in the 7 principles and links them in an interesting way around the central core value of love. So this sort of redo has been proposed, and each of the petals has an accompanied very brief description of what it's intended to mean, both the meaning and what it calls us to do in the world. And I should say that there's going to be a vote about whether or not we want to have this actually be elevated to the status that the 7 principles have held. So in the future, it would replace that while valuing our history. It would say this is a new way to look at the same things. And last year, delegates voted by a great majority to spend a year considering this. This year, they will vote to see whether they want to adopt it in that way. And we're a bottom-up congregation. You'll hear this concept again today. We're a bottom-up faith community where things are decided by the congregations, by the official delegates from the congregations who will vote on this. And that'll happen in the 3rd week of June this year at our national meeting, which this year is 100% online. There will be no traveling to General Assembly. It's all online. Delegates will vote online. It's kind of cool. The online thing is kind of cool. So this gives a chance for everybody to explore it, and I encourage you to do that. But to get back to this picture, I want to point out that because we live embedded in a global economic system dominated by capitalism, which monetizes everything, there are some additional meanings of the word value. The noun includes its cost, price, profit, or worth. And when we value something, we appraise, assess, evaluate, or price it. So when we speak of the value of community, in some sense, we can't not think about money. The monetary aspects of what it takes to support our community and keep it functioning, and that's what I'm talking about now. So considering faith and money together can be an awkward pairing and can be hard to discuss. However, Lynn Twist has a really interesting way of thinking about it. She wrote this book called, or they wrote this book called The Soul of Money. And first, the suggestion is that we let go of the mindset of scarcity. She says, once we let go of scarcity, we discover the surprising truth of sufficiency. Sufficiency isn't an amount, it's an experience. It's a context, a knowing that there is enough and that we are enough. In our relationship with money, it's using money in a way that expresses value rather than determines value. Do you see the difference? It's an outwardly facing kind of word. Sufficiency is a context we bring forth from within that reminds us that if we look around us and within ourselves, we will find what we need. And she goes on to discuss things in a really interesting way. She sees money as a river flowing through our lives. I see it as stored energy flowing through our lives. And if you ever dam up the river, well, that's when you start to have problems. There's not enough water downstream. These folks can't get electricity. And the natural flow of things is impeded. So we want to recognize and celebrate money's power for good, our power to do good with it, and the fact that we can experience fulfillment in directing the flow towards our highest ideals and commitments. When we perceive the world as one, she says, in which there is enough, and we are enough to make the world work for everyone, everywhere, our money carries that energy and generates relationships and partnerships in which everyone feels able and valued regardless of their economic circumstances. So why am I talking about all this today? I'm going to go through this quickly. Your board is expected to be a good manager of our money, of your money, and is expected to report back to you about all of this regarding the financial health and proposed directions, and they're going to do that at the June annual business meeting. Those of you who are able to attend the February meeting gave us a lot of input on what you, the FOOF community, values and what you might like to see happen over the next few years. So we intended to show you some figures then, but due to, honestly, energies, including mine, the handouts didn't quite make it there. So what I want to do is I want to offer for you 2 slides that summarize the broad categories of expenses and incomes for the last fiscal year for which we have data. So here you go. This is expenses. In that year, we spent $47,133, and you can see it's split pretty evenly between operations, which is just a little bit more than 50%, and personnel, that being everybody who gets paid for doing anything here. And because FOOF is a very small fellowship and it hires mostly via contracts instead of by salary, personnel is not as large as it might be if it was done in different ways. Now, if you go ahead and look at income, $53,536, you'll see that if you consider pledges and donations together, who funds us is us, right? We're the bank. There is no from above. Like in many denominations, Christian denominations and others, there is money from above that comes down to the congregations, but that's not true for us. We're a bottom-up faith community, And it's not to say there aren't grants available, there are, but that takes a lot of time and work and planning. What I want to suggest to you today is that there are a lot of ways to marry one's values with one's money. There's planned giving, there's pledging, there's spontaneous donations, and so forth. And so what I want to point out to you is this figure again, in which we see generosity over there at about 7 or 8 o'clock. And the text that accompanies it is, we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. That's what it means. That's what we do. And we covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. In that spirit, and in the interest of full disclosure to you, beginning this month, my own approach is to tithe 5% of my earned income to FOOF every month. And that's my income here and other places. And I do this. Why do I do this? I do it because my growing edges are both nourished and challenged by the living waters of this congregation. I am having experiences here that I wouldn't otherwise be having, and that are very important to me. I do this because sitting and speaking with you on a regular basis sharpens my conscience, and it encourages my open mind to marry both my loving heart and my giving hands, and to figure out what I can actually do in this troubled and hurting world. I do this because every time I am with you, I am struck with yet more reasons to be grateful for this beautiful and imperfect community. It's every bit as imperfect as I am. I do it because I claim joy with both my hands and all of my mind and heart as an antidote to those old and weary ways the world has of still trying to shove people around as if they, you, me, are merely pawns on somebody else's chessboard. And because all of this keeps me humble and in mind of the potent energy of sufficiency and not damming up the flow of energy in the world as it circulates within and because of the Florence Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So that's why I come here. Let us take a moment now of silence to reflect on how each of us might activate the values we share with one another. If there were more time, I would say, I would have broken earlier and said, why don't you talk amongst yourself? But you know what I'm going to do is suggest that you do that. You do that. You do that in the cafe after the service. Why are you here? Why do you come? Talk to people you know, people you don't know. I encourage you to do that. So let's have a moment of silence.